Obviously, none of this information that we're learning is good if the audio cannot be bounced down and sent out as a finished project. The final step of the process is mixing down. This means mixing the project down to a single audio file that can actually be shared, like you would expect with any other audio file. You can then take this final mix and share it however you need, since it has been converted to a standard audio file. This process, depending on the person and the software DAW that you may be working in, can be referred to as different things. It may be called Mixdown, as I'm using right now. It might be bouncing to disk, render, or exporting. Technically, these are all slightly different, but essentially do the same thing, and so they'll be used interchangeably. Reaper uses the term render. However, as I mentioned, at least for this moment, I'm going to use the term mixdown. Essentially, what a mixdown is it takes all of your tracks in a multi-track session and it mixes them down into a single 2 or 1 track file, depending on whether you're working in mono or stereo. And this is done, of course, on the master bus, which I know we've been talking about, but we'll get to later. Before we get to any of this, there's a discussion of when should you mix down. Obviously, at the end of the project, when you want to have your final mix, or whenever you want to share a current mix with someone else, those are times to complete a mix down. I also highly suggest and encourage you to do a mix down at the end of every work or play session on a project. This serves as a recorded stamp in time as to the status of the project and allows you to go back and hear the progress of the project over time. It also allows you to hear how your thinking or approach to the project has changed. I like to store my daily mixdowns in a separate directory within the top level of my project directory. So we'll get to that in a few minutes, but just know I think it's important to have a separate mixdown directory. Okay, in order to prepare for mixdown, there's a couple of things that we need to ensure. First, you want to make sure that no tracks are unintentionally soloed or muted. So let's go over to Reaper here. And you see nothing right now is soloed or muted. Now, this is a great project. I've moved some things around. Everything is timed out how I want it to. And I've ensured that the gain for each track is set so that I can hear everything like I want to as it progresses over time. I'm considering this a final mix of this current project. And again, I'm making sure nothing is muted or soloed. And I've played through my track to make sure that nothing clips. Again, as an example, let's say I was over here and I had this track set to something crazy high. We see clipping occurring not only on that track, but in the master bus. If you've got clipping, what you need to do is essentially turn the fader down so that there is no clipping. If you're getting clipping on the master bus and you like the relative relationship of all of the tracks to each other from an amplitude or volume perspective, then you're going to need to move or reduce, attenuate essentially the fader for each track by the same amount. This will keep the relative amplitude relationships while allowing you to cause the master bus not to clip anymore. Also make sure that your master bus is set to 0 dB full scale on the fader. Again, just double click it. I'd much rather you move all of your faders down than move the master bus down to make sure that there's no clipping. Next, I always like to select the section that I want for my mixdown. You can ask most DAWs to choose what the appropriate section is that should be mixed down, because obviously if we zoom way out, it could go for minutes and hours or whatever. It's not going to do that. It's usually going to stop pretty close to whenever the last moment of audio is. But I want to be specific about it because that's how I work. So I'm actually going to select my mouse somewhere that I want after the audio. And as a note, it's better to select too much audio than too little, because we can always trim off excess, but we can't add on something if we missed it. So I'll put my play hit here, and then I'm just going to select all the way to the beginning to 0, 0. And you actually see this selection up here represented in the timeline, showing me exactly what of the piece I've selected. In this case, all of the audio plus a tail for any extra processing. And we'll again talk about that later. To perform the mixdown, you're going to select render under the File menu in Reaper. So we're going to go File, Render. This is going to bring up a dialog box with a number of options, which we are going to go into detail of all of these things later, but there's a couple basic things I want you to be aware of right now. First off, Master Mix, we want to leave that as Master Mix. Under Bounds, we want to change this from entire project to time selection. That's that selection we just made. That's really important. Under the output section right here, we want to select the Browse button and actually put in a directory where we want to save this. So we're going to go Browse, Browse for directory. And we are going to go into our parent directory here for our basic Reaper functionality, 16 January 2021 session. Notice it's also making backup files. That's great. And I'm going to create a new folder, so I can either click new folder or Command Shift N. It's going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Mixdowns. Great. And now I've got a Mixdowns directory inside of the parent directory that I had selected earlier. Notice now my directory is under Users, Music, Box Sync, Course Content, Large Files, name of this course, Demo Artworks, Week 2, Hello Reaper, the name of the project directory, and then finally Mixdowns at the end. Likewise, if we look at our Finder, we will notice when we go into our top-level Finder, I now have a new directory called Mixdowns. For the file name, go away, there we go. For the file name, I want to be kind of specific about what this is. So this is basic Reaper functionality. We're going to keep the name of this project just as it is. The other thing I'm going to do is at the end, I'm going to add the date. In this case, we've got this date, 16 January 2021. You can leave it. If you were working on this project later or this date wasn't part of the project, I would add it just like here. Date, then 3 letters for the month, and then the numbers. You also instead could do 01 for January, 16 for the day 2021 as an 8-digit number. I have moved, though, to working in this kind of day, number day, 3-letter month, 4-number year format. And then finally, mix, which just represents that this is currently in a mix state. I would also, for the time being, encourage you to put your last name in, because when you submit things, you're going to make sure that that last name is on the front of the file name. All right, in the options section, there's a couple of things that we're going to change as well. For the sample rate, we're going to change this to 48,000 hertz. We're going to talk about what that means later, but for the time being, do 48,000 hertz. Channels, we're going to have this set at stereo. And then where it says full speed offline, we're going to move it to online render. A full speed offline render would essentially try to export this file and create it as quickly as possible in non-real time. So it calculate it all out and do it. There are times when you might want to do this, but the reason I'm suggesting you do an online render is I want you to actually listen to the file as it's created, because you need to listen to the final resulting file before you submit it. So if you do an offline render, you're going to want to listen to that file before you submit it to either me for homework or to someone else that you're working with. And so you might as well do it while it's rendering. What happens is sometimes in the render stage, when you do an offline render, mistakes can be made. Clicks, pops, something can drop out, or it's a last chance for you to hear a mistake you made that you want to fix. By doing it in the online version, you can just combine those two things together. Okay, and then format down below, we want to keep it as WAV for the time being. We're going to keep it as 24-bit PCM. We're not going to change any of the other details there. And then finally, we're going to hit render project. So notice where it says render one file. I'm going to press this, and we're going to actually listen to this 30-second piece render in real time.
Sun Tzu said, "The art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground."
Notice we've got some
Dispersive
information
ground.
while this is going on.
3. Contentious ground. 4. Open ground. 5. Ground of intersecting highways. 6. Serious ground. 7. Difficult ground.
So it was exactly as I expected. There are no errors. It sounds like I wanted it to, and nothing clipped. We can see the file, and then I can say show in Finder. It's going to open up Finder. We see the file. Likewise, if we just go back to our old Finder window and we open Mixdowns, we have this new file there, ready to share with people, ready to go. We could also launch the file, which would open it in the system's default music player, in this case, QuickTime, and then I could play it back and listen to it. Or I can simply close the render window and be done with it. That's the process of exporting, rendering, mixdown, bouncing, etc.